You know what a caveman ate. Everybody does. Meat, fire, a bone held in two hands. Maybe some berries, if the documentary was feeling generous. The picture is wrong. Not in small details. In the frame. The average Paleolithic forager had a diet more biologically diverse than anything a modern nutritionist could design from scratch. Not marginally more diverse. Structurally different. In ways that explain things about your body that medicine is still working to understand. And the evidence isn't in folklore or guesswork. It's in teeth. Fossilized, preserved, readable for thousands of years. In ancient feces analyzed under microscopes. In the preserved bodies of people dead for millennia. In the gut bacteria of the last remaining populations on Earth who still eat the way all of us used to. Here is what they were actually eating. And what your body is still quietly waiting for. You're crouched at the edge of a forest in East Africa, 40,000 years ago. The air smells like dry grass and the rain that's coming but hasn't arrived. The sun is still low. You have a few hours before the heat makes foraging impossible. You have a sharp stone, a carrying net woven from plant fiber, and the knowledge, pressed into you since childhood through 10,000 hours of watching others, of roughly 600 edible species within walking distance. Not all of them taste good. Some are bitter until cooked correctly. Some only work in late summer when their compounds shift as they ripen. Some you reach for because your body signals something it can't put into language, that it needs this specific thing today. You don't have a word for phytochemicals. You don't need one. Your gut knows what it's looking for. It's been trained across 10,000 generations to find it. You have no idea, sitting here in the early morning light, that 10,000 years from now, your descendants will eat 20 species. The same 20. Every week. Every year. Rearranged slightly on the plate. Archaeologists reconstruct ancient diets from dental calculus, the hardened plaque on fossilized teeth that traps food particles for thousands of years. From ancient campsites, from fossilized feces, from studying the few remaining hunter-gatherer populations who still live largely as everyone used to. The number that keeps appearing across all of these sources, the average Paleolithic forager consumed somewhere between 300 and 600 different plant species over the course of a single year. Not varieties of one vegetable, different species, each with different compounds, different fiber structures, different chemicals your gut was processing in ways researchers are still mapping. You probably eat about 20. The same 20. Every week, every month, every year, slightly rearranged. Your body was designed for 600. Right now it's running on 20. That gap is not trivial. And the record of what it costs starts in the teeth. Studies of pre-agricultural skeletal remains find tooth decay rates under 2% in most populations. Some groups, near zero. Not luck, not better hygiene. Because fermentable starches weren't sitting in the grooves of their teeth 3 times a day. Then, agriculture arrived. In 1991, 2 hikers in the Alps found a body face down in a glacier. They thought at first it was a recent accident. It wasn't. Ötzi the Iceman had been frozen since approximately 3,300 BCE. 5,000 years in ice, preserved well enough that researchers could reconstruct his last meal in detail. Red deer meat, ibex, einkorn wheat, bracken fern, moss. At least 4 distinct food sources eaten within 30 to 60 minutes of his death. He was being hunted. On foot in the Alps, in the cold, running out of time, and his last meal, eaten in transit and in danger with almost nothing at hand, was more nutritionally complex than most of what you've eaten this week. That detail doesn't leave you once you sit with it. But the more instructive evidence comes from the transition itself. Researchers studying skeletal remains at a site in Morocco documented the cost of agriculture directly. Before farming, under 2% of teeth showed decay. After, in the same geographic population just a few generations later, over 50%. 50%. Your lineage was somewhere in that shift. The body that had to adapt to wheat and refined grains in a handful of generations is the same body you're walking around in right now. Your gut carries roughly 1,000 bacterial species. That sounds like a lot. It isn't, compared to what it was. Studies of ancient microbiomes, built from fossilized feces and from living hunter-gatherer populations like the Hadza of Tanzania, show that industrialized human guts have lost around 50% of the bacterial diversity our ancestors had. Not lower counts of the same bacteria. Gone. Entire species. absent from industrialized populations worldwide. They didn't disappear because of antibiotics alone. They left because we stopped feeding them. These bacteria lived on fibers from hundreds of plant species. When those species disappeared from human diets, the bacteria that depended on them had nothing left to eat. They didn't come back. The timeline of their disappearance overlaps almost exactly with the rise of autoimmune conditions, chronic inflammation, and allergies across industrialized populations. Researchers are still mapping the full shape of what that loss means, but the overlap doesn't go away the more carefully you look at it. They ate meat. Of course they did. But not the way you're picturing. The muscle, the steak, the part we prize, was almost secondary. What mattered was everything else. The liver, dense with fat-soluble vitamins. The marrow, cracked from long bones for its caloric density. The brain, carrying concentrated DHA. The kidney, sometimes the stomach contents of a freshly killed herbivore, still warm, still partially fermented, full of half-digested plant matter the gut recognized immediately. These were the prized cuts, the ones people ate first. And the eating was communal in a way that's hard to overstate. Food knowledge didn't live in one person's head. It lived in the group. Which berries in which season? Which roots become toxic unless treated with heat? Which combination of plants stopped bleeding? Which ones eased pain during labor? This knowledge accumulated over generations and traveled not through texts or formal teaching, but through eating together, foraging together, returning to the same places through the same seasons year after year. The meal was the classroom. The group was the teacher. A child who ate alongside adults for 15 years absorbed more nutritional knowledge than any textbook could hold, not as facts, but as practice, muscle memory, instinct shaped by repetition. Think about what that meant in practice. If one person in the group discovered that a particular root reduced swelling after injury, that discovery didn't disappear when they died. It traveled. Through meals shared with the next generation, through hands showing other hands how to prepare it, through the unbroken chain of people eating the same things together across hundreds of years. Knowledge that would take a modern scientist years to isolate in a lab was preserved entirely through the act of sitting down and eating. That knowledge, built across tens of thousands of years, began to fragment the moment people stopped moving together through the same landscape. Agriculture was not just a shift in what people ate. It was a shift in how knowledge about eating passed from one generation to the next. And once that transmission broke, it broke in one direction. It didn't come back. Somewhere in the last 10,000 years, we built a food system that produces more calories per acre than any forager could have imagined. We eat year-round. We never go hungry if we have money. And by the only measure that actually matters to your biology, the diversity of what's feeding the systems inside you, we are running on a fraction of what your body was built to process. The body didn't stop needing those 600 species when we stopped eating them. It adapted. It survived. It made do. But adapting is not the same as thriving, and surviving is not the same as getting what you were designed for. Your gut still knows what it's looking for. It's been looking for it for 10,000 years.